I arrived back at the house I once called home, but tonight I'm just a stranger bringing a suitcase and too many ghosts. The porch light cast long shadows over the brick path as I stepped onto the front steps. The columns of the old colonial stood rigid, unchanging, as if it had held its breath since the last time I crossed its threshold. I hesitated, fingers curled tight around the suitcase handle. The last time I stood at this front door, my father told me the military was for people with no ambition. I rang the bell, though I didn't need to. I still remembered the code. But tonight I wanted them to open the door. I needed them to look me in the eye and invite me in, or pretend to. The door creaked open, revealing my mother's polished smile. "Rebecca," she said, as if she wasn't surprised but not exactly pleased either. Her hair was perfect, her cardigan pearl-buttoned, and her voice walked that fragile line between welcome and worry. "You made it." I stepped inside. The air smelled like cinnamon sage, and something less warm formality. "Dad's in the study," she added quickly as if issuing a report. "Chase will be down shortly. He's bringing someone." Of course he was. My suitcase rested just inside the door next to a mahogany table with a dish of keys. I let it sit there, a silent guest, while I followed her into the foyer. The dining room gleamed with preparation. Polished silver. Candlelight flickering in anticipation. A table too long for a family so emotionally short. Richard Alden didn't rise when I entered the study. He simply nodded once. "You look well," he said, without looking up from the decanter he was pouring from. I replied with a similar economy of words. Nothing about where I'd been. Nothing about why it had taken 5 years. We gathered around the table, eventually 4 people performing a ritual neither sacred nor sincere. Evelyn talked about renovations. Dad mentioned the governor's re-election. I filled my plate in silence, my fork touching mashed potatoes I couldn't taste. Then Chase arrived. He entered like a golden beam of sunshine, a woman on his arm, laughter already escaping his lips. "Guess who just became director of operations?" he beamed. "Congratulations, darling," my mother said with rehearsed pride. Even my father smiled. "Well earned." "I trust your speech went over well." Standing ovation, Chase said, seating himself. He didn't even glance at me until halfway through his second glass of wine. "You're quiet, Beck," he said. "Still traveling?" "Still traveling," as if that's all I'd been doing. "Not really," I replied. "Well, we're all glad you could join. Even if it's just for the holiday," Evelyn added. I looked around. Not one photo of me had moved in 5 years. Not one place had changed. Only I had. Dinner progressed. Chase told stories about conferences in Zurich and meetings at the Pentagon. He left out the part about our family's company, Alden Defense Systems, securing new contracts thanks to policy proposals I helped write anonymously while deployed. They didn't ask what I'd been doing. Maybe they thought they already knew. Then Chase lifted his glass. "To real work," he said. "To those out there building things, negotiating deals, putting in the hours." His eyes brushed past me. Not just disappearing for years. Nobody objected. Not even Evelyn. I placed my napkin gently beside my plate, feeling its weight more than the glassware. "Excuse me," I said, voice even. "It's been a long day." I didn't wait for a reply. My footsteps echoed as I ascended the staircase, each step carrying the silence they handed me like a gift. In the guest room, my room, once I unzipped the suitcase. Inside, folded with surgical precision, was my dress uniform. I ran my hand over the insignia. It shimmered faintly under the overhead light. Full colonel. So much metal, so many years. I hung it on the closet door. It didn't belong in a suitcase. It belonged in a war zone or a battlefield dressed as a dinner table. Tomorrow they'd know, but not tonight. Tonight the uniform gleamed in silence. They kept talking over me like I was a visiting cousin, not the person whose name they'd erased from the family history. The dining room glowed warmly, the chandelier casting light over polished silver and crystal glasses, but the warmth didn't reach me. It was all surface, a Thanksgiving tableau carefully curated for holiday photos, not for truth. Chase was in the middle of another story this time, about a conference call with some Defense Department official who apparently thought his idea for a new logistics rollout was revolutionary. My father nodded along his brow creased in mock concentration, while Evelyn offered soft mm-hms and passed the sweet potatoes with robotic grace. I took a sip of water. No one noticed. On the wall behind me, a row of photographs Chase in his ROTC uniform. Chase at his graduation, Chase shaking hands with General Summers during a site visit to Alden Defense Systems. The hallway was a shrine, and I was the ghost they'd decided to leave out of scripture. Not one photo of me, not in fatigues, not in dress blues, not even from my commissioning ceremony. I'd sent one, framed, with a note. I set my fork down. Did you ever receive the invitation to my promotion ceremony? The question landed like a feather on concrete. Evelyn glanced up her fingers, tightening slightly around her napkin. Oh, she said the word, drawn out too long. Yes, I think we did. It came during a busy quarter. Lots going on at the company. Your father was traveling, and, well, we weren't sure what it meant. I stared at her. What it meant, I asked. She folded her napkin delicately as though bracing for a spill. We didn't know if it was something families usually attended. It said something about Colonel, but we weren't sure if that was symbolic or you didn't need to understand it. I said quietly, you just needed to show up. The silence stretched like a tight wire between us. My father cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. Chase glanced down at his wineglass, swirling it with a soft clink of stemware. Evelyn looked wounded, as if I had accused her of something greater than neglect. Maybe I had. I reached for the stuffing, letting the moment dissolve, or at least appear to. Chase, my father said quickly, tell us about that briefing in D.C. last week, the one with the drone specs. Sure, Chase replied, regaining his composure like a seasoned PR man. We're prototyping a new fleet, streamlined, less detectable, more agile. We're trying to lock down a long-term contract with the Pentagon. Impressive. Richard said, pride layered with ambition. The Alden name is becoming synonymous with innovation. Chase nodded smug. The contract will be worth billions if we close. Still, no one asked what I did now, or where I'd been for the last 2 years, or what it took to earn silver oak leaves on my shoulder. I stood slowly and began clearing a few plates my way, of excusing myself again without the drama of an actual exit. Evelyn reached to help, but then hesitated, her hands withdrawing to her lap. She didn't make eye contact. Not once. Back in the kitchen, I rinsed the plates quietly. The clink of porcelain against stainless steel filled the void. My reflection in the window above the sink looked calm, detached, a uniformed officer who somehow still failed to exist in her family's civilian reality. Later, Evelyn called from the living room. Rebecca, we're going through photo albums, come join. I dried my hands and walked in. The fireplace flickered. A thick album lay open on Evelyn's lap pages, already turning. There's Chase at the beach, she said, pointing. And this was his senior prom. She flipped again. A photo of Chase in his college dorm. Another with him and Richard at the gun range. She turned another page quickly. I saw a flash of something olive drab, a short haircut. A barracks. It was gone in a blink. That one looked like mine, I said. Evelyn pursed her lips. It was just a blurry one. I wasn't sure who took it. I did, I said flatly. She nodded, pretending to process that. Chase leaned back on the sofa, fingers laced behind his head. At least you're not still following orders out there, right? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I didn't need to raise my voice. I'd said enough. If a daughter serves her country and no one's there to witness it, did it matter? The upstairs hallway creaked beneath my steps like it had always done, as if the house remembered me better than its occupants did. My old bedroom was exactly how I left it, maybe even how I'd left it at 17. The same lilac walls. The same corkboard dotted with faded ribbons and newspaper clippings from science fairs and track meets. My name etched in bronze on a regional essay plaque. All high school. All things they'd been proud of then. The air smelled of furniture polish and faint dust, a kind of memory you could inhale. I ran a hand across the dresser fingertips, brushing over the corner where I'd once stashed half-written journal entries. My eyes paused on a chipped frame me in high school, smiling beside Chase at some family barbecue. No pictures after that. No images of me in uniform, no framed certificate from the academy, no sign I had even made it through war zones and come out breathing. The only reminder was what I carried within me and the unopened letter I'd sent 5 years ago. I could still see it, the formal envelope with gold-embossed military insignia addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Richard Alden. I had mailed it the day I was promoted to major. A small gesture, a daughter's offering. No one ever called. No card arrived. It was as if I'd tossed it into the ocean. I sank onto the bed, the mattress giving slightly. Beneath it, I found the box I remembered: old notebooks, outdated USBs, and a few worn novels. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe something to prove I had once belonged here. Then something caught my eye, wedged behind the lower dresser drawer, curled and yellowing at the edges. I tugged it free. It was an envelope. No stamp, no seal. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandfather Alden's. My pulse quickened. I unfolded the contents carefully. At the top, Amendment to Will, October 2018. I read faster. To be enacted upon my passing, I bequeath 20% of Alden Defense Systems founding shares to my granddaughter, Rebecca Alden. Her service, integrity, and strategic foresight embody the future I once dreamed this company could serve. The rest blurred. Grandfather Alden had never been soft. He was a man of legacy, of empire building. But he had pulled me aside once when I was 20, right before I left for my first overseas assignment. I could still hear his voice. "You'll be the one to lead us further than I ever could." I sat frozen, paper trembling slightly between my fingers. He died 2 years ago. I hadn't been invited to the funeral. And this letter, this will, was never executed. Someone had hidden it. It hadn't been misplaced. It had been buried. On purpose. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, Evelyn's footsteps, likely heading to her own room. I waited until the sound faded before refolding the letter and tucking it into my suitcase. All these years, I thought I was simply forgotten. Now I realized I'd been erased. She murmurs, "What else have they buried? They erased me from the wall, but not from the world. And tomorrow they'll see." The door to my childhood bedroom clicked shut behind me. The hallway had long since gone silent, only the soft ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs cut through the night. I flipped the old switch and the brass lamp on my desk blinked awake, casting its muted halo across the room. The walls bore the stillness of long abandonment. No new frames, no mementos beyond those high school years, and now no trace of my arrival either. I slid the suitcase out from the corner. Its fabric had faded slightly from all the years, all the miles. Sand from Afghanistan still lined its wheels. Dust from 100 bases had settled into its zippers. But the contents, those were untouchable. I unlatched the case, unfolding the heavy garment bag tucked neatly inside. The scent of cedar rose faintly from the fabric, a sharp contrast to the old linens and floor wax of the house. My fingers moved carefully, reverently. The dark blue wool of the Army service uniform emerged first. Beneath it, silver eagle insignia, polished nameplate, campaign ribbons, a meritorious service medal. Everything arranged with the kind of discipline that couldn't be taught by anything short of purpose. I laid the uniform across the bed like an offering, Piece by piece, I began my ritual. The boots came first, carefully extracted from a separate pouch, already clean, but never clean enough. I pulled out a polishing cloth and the old brown tin that still carried faint fingerprints from nights in barracks and motel rooms. I sat by the edge of the bed, working each leather seam in silence, then the buttons gleaming brass still holding the shine from my last inspection. I clicked them into their loops, tightening the fabric until the coat stood upright on its hanger like a sentinel. The silence broke, barely. My phone resting on the desk lit up. One new voicemail. The time read 22:17. I picked it up, hit play. Colonel Alden, hey, just a heads up. ADS confirmed with the Pentagon liaison. They're expecting you at Oro 900 tomorrow. Thought you'd want the optics right. A short pause. Good luck. They have no idea. Click. The screen dimmed. I sat still, hands resting on my lap. No response needed. No reply given. My presence would be the message. I turned back toward the uniform, now fully assembled and hanging from the top of the closet. The metals reflected softly in the lamplight. The nameplate R. Alden gleamed, sharp, unapologetic. I rose slowly, approached the mirror, lifted the uniform gently and held it in front of me. The weight of it was familiar. It didn't need to say anything, it simply was. I studied my own face. The edges of youth had receded, but the resolve had never left. My hair was still pinned back, regulation tight. My posture still trained from drills, deployments, endless assessments. This uniform had stood at the edges of war, behind classified conference tables, beside flag-draped coffins. It had survived far more than this house could ever know. I didn't need words. Let them have their dinner. I'll take the table. I laid the uniform across the bed like armor turned off the light. The security guard at the entrance stood taller when he saw the rank. My father never did. The early morning light bounced off the polished glass facade of Alden Defense Systems. I approached the lobby with deliberate steps, the rhythm of my heels echoing across the marble like a metronome for a new era. My uniform drew second glances, but not in the way Chase might have imagined. It wasn't novelty, it was respect. "Good morning, Colonel Alden," the security officer said, scanning the badge clipped to my jacket. His tone was crisp, professional, exactly what I needed. "Good morning," I replied, offering a brief nod. The plastic visitor badge affixed to my uniform read clearly, KOL, Rebecca Alden, Pentagon Liaison. The irony that my last name still carried weight, though never within its own walls, wasn't lost on me. I passed the portraits lining the hallway, executives, contractors, the usual parade of middle-aged men in tailored suits. None wore what I did. None had done what I had. The elevator doors chimed. Out stepped Chase, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. His stride was as cocky as ever until he looked up. Our eyes locked. He froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't blink. "What are you doing here?" He finally managed, voice catching like it had hit a gravel road. "I'm on the agenda," I said, voice calm, clipped. Not a smile, not even a smirk. The badge hanging at my chest seemed to shine brighter in his gaze. He looked like someone who'd walked into a surprise party and realized it wasn't for him. From the end of the hall came the sharp click of heels. Clara Hensley, CEO of Alden Defense Systems, walked briskly from the boardroom, tablet in hand. Late 50s, statuesque, surgically composed, her eyes met mine with professional clarity. "Colonel Alden, welcome, let's get started." Chase turned toward her. "Wait, Clara, this is my—" She didn't slow down. "Colonel Alden," she repeated, her voice ringing with authority, "is the Pentagon's appointed liaison for this contract cycle. We're fortunate to have her. I believe she's already familiar with our systems, more than most, in fact." He blinked. His mouth opened again. No one filled the silence for him. We walked past him, our footsteps synchronized. I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. Inside the boardroom, executives sat upright eyes darting between the badge on my chest and the shocked expressions just outside the door. A large screen displayed the agenda DoD liaison briefing. 900. My name sat squarely beneath it. Clara faced the room. Our Pentagon liaison has arrived. Behind her, Chase and my father, Richard Alden, stood frozen in the doorway. Their faces were pale, lips tight, shoulders stiff. I met neither gaze. Instead, I moved to the seat beside Clara without looking at her family. Their faces didn't fall, they froze. There was a split second just before the lights dimmed and the presentation began when I could feel it, the shift. A barely perceptible silence, like a vacuum pulling at the air in the room. Clara stood beside me at the head of the conference table, tapping her tablet to begin the session. A dozen heads turned in our direction, eyes flicking between the Pentagon badge on my chest and the title on the screen. Colonel Alden. Clara began, "Thank you for joining us this morning. As you know, we've been reviewing your previous strategic submission. Fascinating doctrine." I nodded, glad it's finally on the table. The display flicked to life. Projected in bold were 3 words across the dark screen: Sentinel Cybernet Defense. Beneath them, a line drawing I had submitted in 2019, a network integration model designed to protect frontline data relays in joint combat operations. I recognized every algorithmic signature, every routing layer. I had built it with a 4-person team at Fort Meade and sent it through the chain of command. The military praised it. Chase had dismissed it. Across the table, Chase leaned forward. This draft was flagged for further study years ago," he stammered. You thought it was dead," I finished for him. "It wasn't." He swallowed hard. The smile he'd worn like a tailored suit since childhood was gone, now replaced by something thinner: uncertainty. Richard Alden, seated just to Chase's right, cleared his throat. "Colonel," he said, emphasizing the title like it left a bad taste in his mouth, "this system is highly speculative. Cyber overlays at this level require hardware that's barely in prototyping. Have you considered that perhaps it's more theoretical than practical?" I didn't blink. "With respect, sir, I've piloted these overlays in real-time environments with US SOCOM. We've already achieved an 82% encryption recovery rate in simulations. It's operationally viable, and it's scalable." A murmur ran through the room. A lead engineer down the table began flipping through his notes. "I'd like to see those recovery logs," Richard said, voice taut. "They're on the shared drive," Clara cut in. "They've been there since the briefing was scheduled. You're welcome to review them after this session." Richard leaned back, lips pressed together. I moved into my summary. No theatrics, no condescension. Just facts. Metrics, verified simulations. Every sentence a counterpoint to a decade of being underestimated. I answered questions from 2 engineers, 1 Air Force consultant, and even a board advisor seated near Clara. Each response landed like a stone in water, calm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. When I finished, Clara stood. "We'll need a full review of the prior approval chain," she said to the group. "There are inconsistencies between what was submitted and what made it to proposal review. I'll coordinate with the Colonel's office to begin auditing the pipeline starting tomorrow morning." All heads turned to Chase. His jaw shifted. His fingers flexed slightly against the conference table. "Of course," he muttered. "Whatever ensures compliance." Clara didn't flinch. "Good. Integrity starts with transparency." A low tone buzzed from Chase's phone. He picked it up, trying to be subtle. I noticed. So did Clara. I turned just slightly. And there it was. A text message in plain view, typed, but not yet sent. "We might have a problem. Every ghost leaves a trace. You just have to know where to look." After hours, the main building of Alden Defense Systems became a mausoleum of glass and circuitry. The offices emptied out, motion sensors dimmed the hall lights, and the hum of cooling systems replaced executive chatter. I walked the corridors like I had authorization carved into my bones because I did. The visitor badge still clipped to my lapel gave me access, but it was my past that guided me here. I reached the sub-level quietly. The data center hadn't changed since 2019. Same humming racks, same smell of ozone and quiet paranoia. This was the place I had submitted the original Sentinel files during a short-term consultancy 4 years ago, back when I still believed Chase would review them in good faith. Now I knew better. I keyed in the temporary Pentagon override and entered the side control room. One wall blinked softly with diagnostics. The other held a terminal I hadn't used since the day I submitted that proposal. The system had long since been cleaned, or so they thought. No system is clean when someone wants to bury a file, Chase had once told me, voice smug over cocktails at a networking dinner. He was right. A voice behind me broke the silence. You always walk like you're not supposed to be here, but know you belong. I turned. Captain Aaron Knox leaned against the doorframe, a to-go coffee cup in each hand. His uniform was standard civilian contractor wear, navy sport coat, dark jeans, clean cut, but the bearing was military to the bone. He was Army intelligence before this, now listed as a DoD contract analyst. Technically, we weren't supposed to cross paths. Knox, I said, surprised but not startled. Evening, Colonel, he replied, offering one of the coffees. I took it. Didn't know you were assigned to ADS? I'm not, he said, stepping inside. But I make a habit of following interesting trails. And yours lit up last week when your name hit the liaison roster. He moved beside me, pulled a small drive from his pocket, and handed it over. You're not the only one who remembers what they tried to delete. I looked at the USB in my hand. What is it? Your Sentinel submission, the one you filed in 19. This copy has the original metadata timestamps, node signatures, full submission trail, not the scrubbed version Chase pushed last quarter. I stared at the drive. For a moment, I couldn't move. I got it off a server snapshot during a routine systems audit, Aaron said low. Didn't even have to hack anything. They forgot that the cloud logs everything. I slid the drive into my breast pocket. It's time-stamped, I asked. Down to the second, he said. And it shows which user accessed it, who downgraded it, and who flagged it for removal. My breath slowed. This was more than data. This was provenance. A match against Chase's version would be illuminating, I said. Aaron nodded. And admissible. We stood there for a moment in shared silence, the hum of machines buffering our thoughts. How long have you known? I asked. Long enough, he said. I waited because I didn't know which Rebecca I'd be handing it to, the ghosts they left behind, or the one who came back with teeth. I took a sip of the coffee, still warm. He stepped back the doorframe, catching half his shadow. Ready for a second strike, he asked. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just nodded. They expected a quiet morning. I brought fire. The conference room gleamed with authority. 12 high-backed chairs brushed steel accents floor-to-ceiling windows that let in cold November light. On the long oak table, laptops waited like soldiers at attention. I took my seat beside Clara, her tablet already open and ready. Across from us, Chase looked immaculate, pressed suit, confident smirk, a folder of revised specs in hand. The executive strategy board was in session. 3 board members from Alden Defense Systems, 2 senior engineers, a Department of Defense liaison seated near the far end. Richard Alden. My father took his place beside the engineers, silent, observant, imperial. Clara cleared her throat. Mr. Alden, we're eager to hear your updated recommendations regarding the Sentinel initiative. Chase stood, clicked a remote. A clean, color-coded schematic appeared, elegant but stripped. No mention of the recursive packet encryption layer I'd embedded in the original or the adaptive latency nodes. He spoke in polished abstractions. No specifics. Just enough technical fluff to impress the uninformed. When he finished, polite applause followed. Clara didn't clap. I'd like to request a comparative review, I said. Chase blinked. Excuse me. I placed the USB drive on the table. This contains the original 2019 submission of the Sentinel proposal. Unaltered, it includes full metadata and the technical layers missing in today's version. Clara looked at me, then at Chase. Is this accurate? Chase hesitated. I wasn't aware there was a preserved version. Two engineers wheeled around their laptops. Clara nodded at the tech assistant in the corner. Within moments, the screen split Chase's version on the left, mine on the right. The differences were glaring. Side by side, the engineers began calling them out. Packet reintegration missing. Core routing model altered. This version doesn't include sub-encryption redundancy. One engineer scrolled deeper. Ma'am, he said, turning to Clara, the submission on the right is both older and more advanced. Timestamp June 4, 2019. Creator ID tags R. Alden. Clara raised an eyebrow. Rebecca Alden. Yes, ma'am. The second engineer added, and the current version submitted under Chase Alden's name shows a modification trail. There are edits from multiple users, but the most significant structural changes originated from the credentials of a lead engineer account. Everyone turned toward Chase. He shifted in his chair. There must be an error. The log shows clean, the engineer replied. No spoofing. I kept still. My heart didn't race. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. Clara stood. This meeting is suspended pending an internal investigation. Until we determine the full scope of these discrepancies, no further advancement on the Sentinel proposal will proceed. Chase's eyes flicked toward the board members searching for refuge. None came. I want a full report on my desk by end of day, Clara continued, including version history and access logs. And I want to know specifically why a proposal submitted in 2019 was never escalated to management. The room rippled with discomfort. Chairs shifted. Throats cleared. No one spoke. And then, from the side of the room, Richard stood. His voice was low but sharp, each word measured. What are you really after, Rebecca? I saw it in his eyes. He would rather burn the house than lose the throne. The boardroom had emptied, but the air remained leaden heavy with unspoken accusations and clashing pride. I walked past Chase in the hallway. He didn't say a word, just gave a tight, glacial smile. There was something dangerous behind his calm, something coiled. Within hours, the retaliation began not with shouting or denials, but with a circulated memo. An anonymous internal concern had flagged the Sentinel 2019 draft as overly conceptual, insufficiently tested in live operations. By mid-afternoon, the memo had made its way into internal Slack channels, CC'd to key stakeholders, and somehow, Clara. I was called back to the main conference room. We're pausing the Sentinel review. Clara said, her voice flat, her eyes not quite meeting mine. The executive team has requested time to validate counterclaims before proceeding further. I stared at her. You think my data is fabricated? No one said that, she replied. But someone is trying to put doubt into the room, and for now, we have to acknowledge it, and in doing so, you legitimize it. Her silence was an answer. I left the building without speaking to Chase, without acknowledging Richard. I walked out into the cold November wind with my jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a tooth. The sidewalk blurred under my steps. My thoughts weren't thoughts anymore. They were heat noise, pressure in my throat. How many more times would this house find new ways to erase me? That night, back at the estate, I sat alone in my childhood room with the curtains drawn and the uniform still hanging beside the closet. The silence clawed at me. For a moment, I allowed the question to form, had I already lost? The hallway echoed with faint laughter, Evelyn and Chase sharing wine. I closed the door. Then my phone buzzed. Aaron, meet me in 20. We're not done. I grabbed my coat. ADS's secondary campus sat silent at night, its outer lights flickering like distant sentries. Aaron waited for me by the side entrance, keycard in hand, laptop under his arm. He didn't speak until we were 2 floors down in the records room, a windowless corner of the building where engineers used to archive proposal logs. He set the laptop on the table and opened a document I hadn't seen before. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a scan," he said. "Official routing form, DODX 77, signed in May 2020. My name was there, printed cleanly beside a title I had almost forgotten belonged to me, Primary Strategic Author, Sentinel Protocol. I looked at the digital signature, a real one, Pentagon verified, time stamped, encrypted chain of custody. "This went through," I whispered. Aaron nodded. "The department received it. Someone in ADS suppressed the confirmation internally." My stomach turned. "So they buried a Pentagon signature?" I said, almost laughing, the bitterness thick in my voice. Aaron leaned forward. This kills the counterclaim memo. If the DoD accepted the draft, then no internal report can refute its legitimacy. We have paper trail timestamp and federal backing." I blinked. A strange thing happened inside me, not hope, not joy, just the steadiness of ground returning beneath my feet. I turned to him. "Let's bring it back to life." They thought I came empty-handed. I came with the truth. The conference room looked different under fluorescent scrutiny. This wasn't just an internal board review anymore. It was an open session expanded at Clara's request. A representative from the Department of Defense sat flanked by 2 aides. A legal advisor stood near the projection screen, arms crossed, watching everyone like a silent referee. And in the back, I noticed a correspondent from Defense Chronicle badge barely visible under her blazer. Clara had planned this well. "Colonel Alden," she said evenly, "you requested this session under the provisions of federal whistleblower protection. The floor is yours." I rose, sliding the USB drive from my jacket pocket. "Thank you, Ms. Hensley." The projector lit up with a clean interface, Aaron's handiwork. I clicked through 2 files. First I said, "This is a DoD routing form, DODX 77, signed and dated May 18th of 2020. It confirms the department's receipt and acknowledgement of the original Sentinel proposal authored under my direction." Gasps were restrained, but audible. Second, I opened the next tab, is an internal email thread from ADS Engineering. This was flagged as archived and made inaccessible without admin override. It discusses the directive to suppress the 2020 acknowledgement internally. The access logs show the modification was made under Senior Engineer ID associated with Chase Alden. Silence fell like a gavel. Chase shifted in his seat. "Anyone could fabricate the hash matches our central system," one of the engineers interrupted. "And the admin ID was used from your terminal." Chase's mouth opened, then shut. Clara sat forward. "Colonel Alden, thank you for presenting this. Your conduct has been above reproach. As CEO, I deeply regret the procedural failures that led to this oversight." My eyes flicked briefly toward my father. Richard sat stone-faced, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together like he could hold something from unraveling if he just gripped tightly enough. "Given this development," Clara continued, "we'll be re-evaluating project leadership histories and all prior promotions related to Sentinel. Effective immediately." The legal advisor nodded slowly, as if to confirm gravity had indeed taken hold. I wasn't finished. I turned to Clara. "I'm aware of ADS's current vacancy for a permanent strategic advisor to the board liaison to the Pentagon. I would be willing to consider the role under the condition that transparency becomes policy, not exception." Clara didn't hesitate. "Colonel Alden, the offer stands." A beat of silence passed, and for a moment it felt like air re-entered the room. Then I turned. Richard was staring at me, not with anger, but with the ache of realization. I walked toward him, measured, calm. "I sent you the same file," I said. 5 years ago." His eyes didn't move. He just blinked, slow and hollow. "They invited me to dinner again. This time I sat at the head of the table." The conference room was the largest one. ADS had polished wood, 12 chairs around a gleaming table, and an audience that had grown larger than ever before. Clara stood near the screen, arms folded in poise, while investors, senior engineers, and legal observers filled the side seats. Evelyn sat toward the back, her eyes never quite meeting mine. At the head of the table where Chase usually sat, I rested my hands. The seat was warm with scrutiny. I appreciate everyone's time, I began. Today's agenda is transparency. Clara gave a single nod, stepping back. Colonel Alden will walk us through her findings. I connected my device and the projector flickered to life. This thread, I said, highlighting a series of messages from 2020, shows an internal directive to halt the Sentinel proposal. The timestamp and metadata trace the directive to Chase Alden's admin ID. Chase leaned forward, voice tight. There's no proof I issued those commands personally. Admin access is... You used that same login 6 minutes before the file was altered, I replied calmly. You changed 3 access permissions and renamed the folder. All logs confirm this. The room held its breath. Then Aaron's voice piped in from the speaker, live from DC, crisp and deliberate. For those who don't know me, I'm Captain Aaron Knox, attached to the Pentagon's Cybersecurity Division. I assisted Colonel Alden in tracing the archived files and confirming integrity hashes. These were untouched copies stored redundantly since 2019. The edits Mr. Alden claims ignorance of originated from his terminal on a secure connection. There's no ambiguity. Chase's knuckles whitened. From the back, a quiet sound, a chair scraping, then Evelyn stood. Her voice was fragile but audible. I saw the letter, she said. The one you sent us in 2019. Your promotion notice. Your grandfather's will. Everyone turned. Evelyn clasped her hands. Richard. He said it would confuse things. That we'd wait until Chase was more settled. My father stiffened. You let them bury me. I said, not as an accusation, but a truth rising like steam. She's twisting this, Richard snapped, standing. This company, this family, none of it survives public division. I rose to my feet. You did that when you erased me. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. Every eye darted between us, between the man who ruled from legacy and the woman who returned with proof. Clara cleared her throat. Effective immediately, I am recommending Mr. Alden's suspension pending full review. The board will vote on this next week. Chase didn't respond. His face already told the story. Richard stepped back, saying nothing. Then Clara turned, looking directly at me. Colonel Alden, will you be joining our board of advisors? Silence. All eyes turned. I didn't speak. Let them wait. He built his empire on silence. I broke it with one sentence. The Defense Strategy Summit in Washington, D.C. was no ordinary event. It was being live-streamed to military contractors, congressional staffers, and news outlets nationwide. The cavernous hall buzzed with soft chatter, camera shutters, and the weight of announcements that could shift federal priorities. A massive LED screen glowed behind the stage, the official seal of the Department of Defense framed in blue and brass. Clara Hensley stepped forward. The heels of her shoes echoed like punctuation against marble. Thank you for joining us today, she said. Alden Defense Systems is proud to announce a new era of collaboration with the Department of Defense. And at the helm of our strategic integration team is a name many should know, Colonel Rebecca Alden. There was a beat of silence then. Camera shutters fired in quick succession. I stood and approached the podium. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Behind me, the title slide illuminated the room. Sentinel Cybernet Defense Project. Strategic Lead Colonel Rebecca Alden. For a long time, my name hadn't been allowed on slides, plaques, or place cards. Now it was center stage, in font size 64. I scanned the crowd. Most wore neutral expressions, military, corporate, procedural. But I saw Evelyn's face beamed in on the live stream monitor backstage. She sat alone, hands folded in her lap, eyes already glassy. I began. For years, this proposal sat in a drawer, filed then forgotten. Not for its lack of merit, but because the wrong person had written it. I let the weight settle. They thought the author's credentials mattered less than their surname. They thought erasure could be tidy. But code doesn't lie. Records don't vanish when the right people care to look. I clicked to the next slide, side-by-side architecture diagrams from 2019 and 2024. My design, my structure. Chase's name nowhere in sight. That's when Chase burst through the side entrance, still in a navy blazer, still clinging to dignity, like it was stitched to his lapels. "This isn't accurate," he declared. "I was part of the original think tank. That diagram, a senior engineer, Lieutenant." Commander Harrow stood up from the front row. "With all due respect, Mr. Alden," he said firmly, "we've confirmed the timestamps and the codebase. These designs originated from Colonel Alden's submission to the Pentagon's open-source repository. Yours did not." Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Clara didn't even look surprised. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Colonel Alden." One question. How did this go unnoticed for 5 years? I met her gaze directly. Because they looked at my name, not my work. The silence that followed was reverent. Not hollow, not obligatory, but earned. I clicked to the final slide. No data, no diagrams. Just a sentence I had written at 2 a.m. the night before. "Let the system serve everyone, starting with the truth." I leaned toward the microphone. I was erased from the dinner table, the boardroom, and the family. Today, I returned to all three. Applause broke out. First staggered, then rolling. Clara rose to shake my hand. Flashes lit the hall. Somewhere across town, Evelyn watched with trembling hands. A single tear escaped before she reached for a tissue. Her lips moved in silence. And Richard. He didn't blink. Didn't sigh. He just reached for the remote and turned off the screen. Victory isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the silence that follows a slammed door. The press conference wasn't long. A handful of cameras, some terse statements, no room for questions. Chase stood before the podium in a navy suit that suddenly looked oversized, like it no longer belonged to the man inside it. He read from a prepared card. The delivery was flat. "I've decided to step down from my position at Alden Defense Systems, effective immediately. My focus will be on rebuilding trust both personally and professionally." He didn't thank the board. He didn't acknowledge Rebecca. And when the cameras turned off, he vanished into a car with tinted windows and no forward address. The news broke by noon. Stockholders blinked. Social media frothed. A clipped email from Clara's office followed. "A leadership review is underway. Core operations remain intact. Sentinel remains active." By evening, a second headline began to circle. "Richard Alden to exit Family Oversight Board amid ethics probe." I stared at the screen. The words had a surreal weight, like paper soaked in oil. Richard hadn't resigned voluntarily. The advisory board had voted him out. Clara had made the motion herself, citing a compromise of internal transparency obligations. He didn't answer calls that day. Clara and I met in the quiet of her office, the blinds half drawn. She offered tea. I declined. "You don't need to answer now," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "But if you're open to it, we'd like you to serve as permanent strategic advisor. Full-time. You'd be defining the future." I opened the folder. The terms were generous, flexible, powerful, and for the first time in years, they came without asterisks. "Let me think about it," I said. She smiled. I expected nothing less. I didn't go back to the Pentagon that night. Instead, I went home. The Alden estate sat quiet in the dusk, the porch light glowing like it had forgotten everything. Evelyn was waiting inside, sitting in the living room with a small cardboard box on her lap. When I stepped through the door, she looked up. Her eyes were red, but her posture steady. "I thought you might come," she whispered. She held out the box. I kept them, she said. All your letters, from Kandahar, from Ramstein, from DC. I couldn't open them. I told myself I didn't know what to say back. I sat across from her, the distance not as wide as it once felt. You don't have to explain, I said. Not now. She set the box on the coffee table and pushed it toward me. I didn't touch it. Instead, the next morning, I walked to my father's study. He was seated behind his old desk, not typing, not reading, just existing. I placed the box in front of him. You don't have to read them, I said, but you don't get to throw them away anymore. I turned to leave. My steps were slow but certain. Behind me, I heard the soft rustle of cardboard. A pause. Then the gentle slide of an envelope being drawn from the stack. But no sound of it being opened. I walked on. Some ruins aren't rebuilt. They're walked away from. The morning after Thanksgiving felt like a long exhale. No cameras, no tense handshakes, no glass boardrooms or forced greetings. Just sunlight filtering through my apartment window in DC, catching on the rim of a half-finished coffee mug. I stood barefoot on the kitchen tiles, hands wrapped around a warm cup, listening to the silence. It wasn't hollow. It was welcome. Fix what you can. Carry what you can't. The words came back to me from a sand-blown night in Afghanistan when we'd lost power to the comms tent and had to scrawl orders by flashlight. A sergeant had said it like a prayer. I didn't know then it would follow me home. There was a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find Evelyn, no makeup, no pearls, no distance. She held no flowers, no apologies, just a paper bag with 2 croissants and a quiet determination to be present. I let her in. We didn't talk much. She sat on the couch while I poured another round of coffee. She took hers black like always. I added a drop of oat milk like always. The clinks of the spoon were the only conversation for a while. Then I queued up the live stream recording my speech from yesterday. I didn't know why I played it. Maybe to fill the space. Maybe to see if it still felt real. Evelyn leaned forward during the line. I returned to the dinner table, the boardroom, and the family. She didn't say anything, but when the video ended, she whispered so softly it might have been mistaken for breath. Colonel. The word dropped like a pebble into still water. No ceremony, no disclaimer. Just truth. A small light blinked on my phone. A call from Aaron. I stepped into the hallway. We're launching a new NATO cyber intel program, he said. High clearance, clean team. You'd be point. I appreciate it, I replied. But I think I need something different now. He didn't press. Coffee soon, he asked. Count on it. Back in the living room, Evelyn was flipping through a small stack of mail I hadn't opened. Most were government memos or old alumni newsletters, but one padded envelope stood out. No return address. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, weathered familiar. Grandfather Alden's. My throat tightened. I flipped through it gently, pages filled with looped handwriting and worn ink. On one page, centered almost like a headline, Rebecca will not inherit this house. She will command her own. I read it again, slower this time. Not bitter. Not rejected. But empowered. I didn't need to rebuild the Alden name. I never did. I had already built something else entirely out of silence, out of grit, out of absence. Later that afternoon, I drafted my reply to Clara. I thanked her for the offer but declined the permanent post. Instead, I accepted a rotating advisory role and enrolled to teach at the War College come spring, strategic ethics and operational integrity. Not legacy. Purpose. By dusk, Evelyn had gone. The apartment was clean again, empty but not lonely. I closed my laptop and stood by the window. Outside, the world moved on cars, passing leaves, falling, a sky streaked with amber and steel. Let's begin. This time, they waited for me before sitting down. The Alden dining room hadn't changed. Not the mahogany chairs, not the gold-trimmed china, not the chandelier shaped like a frozen fountain. But the air was different. measured, watchful, not warm, but not cold either, somewhere between apology and acceptance. It was Christmas Eve. The table stretched long and elegant, set for 12. Candles flickered, catching reflections in the window panes. The place card at the head of the table bore my name printed in careful calligraphy, Colonel Rebecca Alden. They had called. Not Evelyn, not Chase, but a cousin I barely knew. The message was simple. They'd like you home for Christmas. I said yes. When I entered, no one stood to greet me, but no one ignored me either. They paused. Knives, hovered wine glasses held mid-air waiting, so I sat. Then they followed. A single envelope rested beside my plate. I opened it discreetly. Clara's handwriting was unmistakable. To Colonel Alden, your integrity changed everything. Thank you. C. Hensley. Across from me. Evelyn adjusted her napkin with shaky fingers. Richard sat at the far end, eyes on his plate, not speaking. The first half of dinner passed in a practiced silence. Polite chewing, utensils grazing porcelain, occasional glances that didn't last. Then Evelyn rose, glass in hand. I'd like to make a toast, she said, her voice steady but soft, to the one who reminded us what legacy really means. She looked directly at me. No apology, no tears, just clarity. I stood slowly. There's something I'd like to say. I began, my voice calm, controlled like a cadence drill. It's a story. Short. I let the silence breathe before continuing. There was a man in my first unit. Never talked much. Never raised his voice. But he carried the comms, the medkits, and every broken piece we couldn't name. No one gave him medals, but we always made sure he had a seat at the table. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it, revealing a silver medal, the one I had received in 2020 and never mentioned. The one no one had asked about. I placed it in the center of the table. Sometimes people don't know what you've done. Sometimes they choose not to. That's their burden, not yours. A few heads turned toward the medal. A few eyes dropped to their plates. You don't need to accept me, I said clearly. You just need to know I'm not going anywhere. I sat. No applause. No rebuttal. But then Richard looked up. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. But he nodded. Once. That was all. And somehow it was enough. The house that once silenced me now listens, maybe not with warmth, but with recognition. What they tried to erase didn't vanish. It waited, sharpened by time and truth. Justice doesn't always arrive in parades. It walks in quietly, carrying the receipts. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. If this story moved something in you, like, share and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you wished for more.